Good day, everyone. I'm here to present to you my paper entitled Beginning Reading Development Among Deaf Learners in the Primary School. My name is Tyrone O, Gil Jr. I am a PhD in education student from the University of the Philippines. Many researchers have already discussed and examined the processes of how deaf learners learn how to read. This is according to Marshark and Hauser in 2012. Many interested educators and researchers try to fill the gap in the cognitive processes and its implications to the reading instruction in the education of the deaf by Trizik and Mayer in 2019. This paper will examine the nature and challenges of reading development among deaf learners who are at the beginning reading stage. Likewise, this paper will also offer effective instructional strategies for developing beginning reading among deaf learners in the primary school for all teachers to benchmark and apply in their respective inclusive classrooms where a deaf learner or a group of homogeneous deaf students attend. Several scholarly studies and in-depth research were identified using the essential questions as the main criteria for selecting appropriate and valuable studies on the development of this paper. This paper is guided with the following research problem. First one, how does beginning reading develop among deaf learners in primary school? Two, what are the effective instructional strategies for developing beginning reading among deaf learners in primary school? However, before we proceed to how language and literacy develops among deaf learners, I think it's very important to define first what we mean by deafness. IDEA 2004, or the Individualized Disability Education Act of 2004, defines deafness as a hearing impairment that is so severe that the student is impaired in processing linguistic information through hearing with or without amplification that adversely affects the student's educational performance. On the other hand, when we say hard of hearing, it's different with deafness. Hard of hearing refers to people with hearing loss ranging from mild to severe. This is according to WHO in 2024. In other words, deaf students refers to students who doesn't receive information through their sense of hearing, even with the use of any assistive devices or amplification. On the other hand, hard of hearing students or learners are still able to receive information through their sense of hearing, however, with the help of several assistive devices or amplifications. So how does language develop among deaf learners in the primary school? The relationship between language proficiency and literacy outcomes are inevitably correlated and well documented according to Ching and Couples 2015. Evidence suggests that language development has a profound implication on literacy development and instruction. Hence, it is inexorable to provide a brief section on language development among deaf learners in this paper. Given the above statement, Lederberg and his colleagues in 2013 identified three models that influence language development among deaf learners, specifically on the influence of the learning environment on the proximal development of learners. The first is the sign language model, which actually gives emphasis on the development of deaf learners within the culturally deaf communities that use natural sign languages. However, for clarification, when we refer to um, sign languages, we're not just referring here to the American Sign Language. This model places sign language as the primordial language that deaf children must acquire in beginning literacy. Likewise, the importance of early and naturally occurring social activities for deaf learners to acquire sign language. The second model is called spoken language model, which actually aims for deaf children to become as much like hearing children as possible in their language and literacy behaviors. This model includes the exposure of deaf children to spoken language only with varying degrees of accommodation and encouragement for gestures and speech reading. With this, deaf learners are expected to become fluent in oral language through natural communication without the use of sign language. The third model is SIMCOM, or simultaneous communication. Unlike the previous model, where the teacher of the deaf must strictly follow the principles dictated by the approach, for example, sign language and spoken language, SIMCOM involves the simultaneous use of sign language and spoken language at the same time. So this model explains that deaf learners learn their first language through mixed interaction of both sign and oral language present in their immediate environment. In a separate study, Scott and Dostal in 2019 proposed two ways in which deaf and hard of hearing children are exposed to the means of communication and by implication, language development. First one is the natural languages, and second is through the communication system. The natural languages include the American Sign Language and other sign language systems that develop within the deaf community and the spoken English. In contrast, communication systems include iterations of signed English and cued speech. Harkins and Bake in 2011 identified two major advances that paved the way to the diversification of language development trajectories among deaf and hard of hearing children. First is new technologies have advanced the way experts identify hearing impairment at birth. And then second, the technological revolution has enabled many DHH children or deaf and hard of hearing children to increase their ability to perceive auditory information and acquire language. So, with the development of language, there is a connection with the development of literacy. Once the students learns their own language, the student can embark to learn or to develop literacy skills. So how does reading develop among deaf learners in the primary school? Spencer and Marshart in 2010 identified several factors that are central to understanding of the acquisition of literacy skills, specifically reading by deaf and hard of hearing children. First one is early experiences in literacy skills development. Though some researchers question the dichotomy of language development and reading skills, somehow they consensually agree that early experiences in which adults read to and with children in the most pleasurable contexts supports the acquisition of reading skills. Second is phonological knowledge, which actually refers to phonic skills that provide an important mediator for the acquisition of literacy skills, which is also present among fluent readers. Experts made assertions that deaf children develop phonological awareness parallel to their hearing peers. However, deaf children may experience delay due to the lack of auditory input they receive from their environment. The third one is their vocabulary knowledge. When we refer to the vocabulary size, this refers to the stored words that the students already know compared to their hearing companions. The DHH children indeed has a smaller number of vocabulary knowledge. This is actually due to the delay in language development and other literacy development barriers that the DHH child will encounter during primary years of literacy development. The fourth one is knowledge of the syntax in written language. Syntax refers to the systematic arrangement of words and phrases to create well-formed sentences. Kelly in 2003 claims that the weaker the phonological knowledge of a deaf child, which means greater chance to have syntactic problems that are evident in reading and writing. Knowledge of one language, which is the last one. Several studies have posited that an individual's proficiency in a specific language can support fluency in learning other languages. There are two deaf children who were born and trained by their parents to have naturally sign language as their first language or mother tongue, while learning the commonly spoken language later in their formative years in education. With the provided literatures, I wanted also to connect my findings from the literature review with a theory that proposes language and literacy development among DHH children. The most applicable one is the Simple View of Reading by Goff and Tumner in 1986. The SVR as a model describes reading comprehension as a product of two primary components, decoding and language comprehension. The idea of SVR is that both decoding and language comprehension are essential for reading comprehension. In this case, the SVR model actually suggests that deaf learners have poor decoding skills but good language comprehension is equivalent to poor reading comprehension. The same case when a learner with good decoding skills but poor language comprehension results to poor reading comprehension. Only when decoding skills and language comprehension skills are strong, then we expect for strong reading comprehension skills. Likewise, the SVR states that a deaf learner must learn essential skills to decode, such as phonological awareness, decoding and spelling, sight recognition, and language comprehension, like background knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. So, based on the literature cited and the theory that I have mentioned, what are the effective reading strategies that we can recommend given this idea of how reading develops among deaf students in primary grades? First one is that teachers can use total communication. Actually, it is a philosophical approach that uses different modes of communication, whether oral, written, auditory, and manual, for teaching DHH learners while acknowledging the diverse needs of DHH learners. This is actually a new movement that emerged in deaf pedagogy that considers the overall learning experience and means of communication for teaching the deaf. And applied to teaching, the teacher of the deaf must actually select a developmentally appropriate approach in teaching deaf learners based on the lesson content, skills to be developed, and learners' preference for communication. When we refer to total communication, it means acknowledging diversity and choosing the appropriate type of reading strategy that can actually be applied to teaching deaf learners in the primary grades. The second one is shared reading activities or programs. It became a popular reading program in developing language and literacy skills among deaf preschoolers, and it includes an engagement of children in reading and discussing the stories with an adult or an older peer, and it highlights the importance of making reading a pleasurable and interactive activity. The third strategy that I can recommend is the use of direct and mediated instruction. The National Institute of Direct Instruction stipulates that direct instruction is a model for teaching that emphasizes well-developed and carefully planned lessons designed around small learning increments and clearly defined and prescribed teaching tasks. The Institute believes that direct and mediated instruction can be used to teach deaf children in reading, and mediated instruction, on the other hand, is the use of instructional technology and media to assist learners in learning new knowledge and skills. Combined together as a teaching strategy for reading, it becomes an effective approach to intervention for young deaf readers. To conclude, educators and researchers highlight that deaf children, despite of their impairment, are still capable of competing as successful readers with their hearing peers with the right amount of effective intervention programs, early detection, early exposure to literacy skills, and knowledge of the language structure. The application of different evidence-based teaching strategies in reading for DHH learners is also encouraged to better understand and develop language and literacy skills, whether inside and outside the formal educational setting. And guided by the SVR, proposed reading interventions or programs must be thoroughly planned and implemented using the same variables in the SVR equation. Finally, investing in teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing children's education must be recognized by educational leaders to escalate the playing field for both deaf and hearing students, and by implication, promote inclusive education. Here are my references, and thank you very much for listening.